Esther Marsh was 17 when the old Duke of Wickham paid her father £30 to send her away from his son. He did it at the gate. 30 gold sovereigns counted into a weaver's cracked palm, as though a girl were a length of cloth to be measured and sold. She did not weep. She stood in the spring mud of Holden Bridge and she counted the coins herself. Then she walked into town and bought thread with them. A week later, the Dowager Duchess said it aloud. She said it at the harvest fair, before 40 tenants who all went quiet. A draper's girl does not marry into Wickham, and the young Lord Julian was on the London coach before the fair lanterns were even cold. Now hear this. 12 years on, a black carriage stops in the West Riding of Yorkshire, outside the largest cloth warehouse in the county. The Duke of Wickham has come home a widower, his father in the ground, his great house mortgaged to the last brick. And the name painted gold above that warehouse door is hers. If you believe it's never too late for the heart, this story is for you. Before we go on, subscribe to the channel so a story like this always finds you. And do me one kindness, comment the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels tonight. Now, let me take you back to the beginning of it. And let me take you slow. Holden Bridge sat in a fold of the Pennine Hills, where the river ran brown with peat and the looms never truly stopped. It was spring of 1867. The chimneys smoked, the market bell rang the hours, and of all the folk who woke before dawn in that town, none rose earlier than Esther Marsh. She was 29 now. Not the girl at the gate anymore. She was the richest draper in the whole of the county, and she had built every inch of it herself. 3 warehouses bore her name. 60 pairs of hands drew their wage from her ledgers. Marsh and Company supplied the uniform cloth for half the mills in the riding and the black mourning crepe that every family sooner or later has cause to buy. She knew wool the way a shepherd knows sheep. She could tell you the county a fleece came from by the feel of it between 2 fingers, in the dark, with her eyes shut. But that is not why the town loved her. The town loved her for the winter before. It had been a hard one. The American cotton trade had gone to pieces, and the slack season had stretched on, and there were weavers in Holden Bridge who would have starved. Esther kept them on. She bought cloth she did not need, and stored it in a barn, and paid the wages out of her own strong box, week after week, until the trade turned. She never spoke of it. She never once let it be called charity. She simply did it, and the whole town knew, and the whole town remembered. She paid as well for the parish infirmary. The 2 beds by the north window, where the poorest went, were kept warm on her coin. No plaque said so. She would not allow a plaque. You must understand the whole of this woman before the Duke comes back into it, because when he does, the county will say she is a woman waiting to be rescued. And nothing on this earth was further from the truth. There was only one thing about Esther Marsh that did not add up. In the top drawer of her writing desk, beneath the leases and the letters of account, she kept a small japanned box. Black lacquer, a little Chinese scene painted on the lid in gold, worn now at the corners. It was locked. The key hung on a ribbon at her own throat, under her collar, where no clerk ever saw it. If you had asked her what was in it, she would have told you nothing. She would have said it was an old thing she kept out of habit. She would have said she never had cause to open it. That was a lie, and it was the only lie Esther Marsh told, and she told it mostly to herself. Now, on the same grey morning that Esther was down at the warehouse counting bales, a carriage was climbing the far road to Wickham Hall. Inside it sat a man and a small girl, and neither of them had said a word for the last 10 miles. The man was Julian Hale, and he was now the Duke of Wickham, though he took no pleasure in the title. His father had died in the winter and left him 2 things, a name that opened every door in the county, and a debt that would close them all again. £40,000 owed to a London bank, secured against the Hall and every acre round it. The interest alone was a millstone. He was 33. There was grey coming in early at his temples, and a stillness about his mouth that had not been there when he was a young lord. He wore a good coat gone slightly shabby at the cuff. In the breast pocket of that coat, close against him, he carried a folded square of indigo cloth. He had carried it for 12 years. He did not take it out where anyone could see. The girl beside him was Grace. She was 9 years old, and she was his daughter, and she had lost her mother in the autumn. Julian's marriage had been an arranged thing, a cold and dutiful match his father had built for reasons of land, and there had been little warmth in it while it lasted. But the child had loved her mother in the quiet way children do, and since the burying Grace had scarcely spoken above a whisper. She would answer if she was asked. She would not offer. She sat now with her hands folded in her lap like a much older woman watching the wet hills go by. The carriage came up the last rise, and there was the hall. Julian had remembered it grander. In his memory it had glowed. Now he saw the truth of it in the flat spring light. The shutters had warped in their frames and hung crooked. Ivy had got into the stonework. 2 windows on the east front were boarded. The great lawn had gone to meadow, unscythed. It was a beautiful ruin, and it was his, and it was drowning. He handed Grace down. She looked up at the huge dark house and said nothing at all. "Here we are," he said, and heard how hollow it sounded, and wished he had said nothing too. An old woman came out onto the steps. This was Mrs. Bramwell, the housekeeper, who had been at the hall longer than Julian had been alive. She was bent now, and her hands shook a little, but her eye was clear, and it went straight to the child. "Master Julian," she said. She had never once in her life managed to call him Your Grace, and she was not going to start. "And this'll be the little one." She came down 2 steps, slow, and got herself level with Grace, and she did not fuss. She only said, "There's a fire in the small parlour, and there's bread. You come in out of this damp." Grace looked at her, and after a moment the child put her small cold hand into the old woman's, which was the most she had offered anyone in months, and the 2 of them went in together. Julian stood a moment on the gravel. Then he took the folded indigo cloth from his pocket, half out, just enough to touch. There was a crooked monogram stitched in one corner. 2 letters, J and H, sewn by a hand that had been young and unpractised and in love. The stitches went uphill. He had never had them mended. He would sooner have burned the hall down than have them mended. He put it away. He went inside. Word of a thing like this travels a valley faster than the river runs. By the 2nd day, all of Holden Bridge knew the Duke of Wickham had come home. By the 3rd day, they knew he had come home broke, and the county, being the county, drew its conclusion at once. You would hear it in the snug of the Fleece, and over the counters of the Drapers, and at the church door on Sunday. The ruined Duke had come back to marry money. It stood to reason. A man with a great name and no coin marries a woman with great coin and no name, and each of them mends what the other lacks. It was the oldest trade in England. And who in the whole riding had coin like Esther Marsh? They said it kindly enough, most of them. They said it the way you'd remark on the weather. But it settled over the town as fact, and it settled over Esther too, and she heard it, because she heard everything. She said nothing. She went to her ledgers. But that same week another shadow came across her table, and this one was no idle gossip. This one had a lawyer behind it. His name was Aldous Pennington, and he was a mill magnate and a speculator, and he was the one man in the district richer than Esther Marsh. He owned looms by the 100 over at Sowerby. He owned land, and what most folk did not know, but what Esther knew very well, was that Aldous Pennington owned the ground. Her 3 warehouses stood on leasehold land. She owned the buildings, the stock, the business, all of it, but the earth beneath the stone was held on an old ground lease, and in the shufflings of the last few years that lease had come into Pennington's hands. He had bought it quiet, the way he did everything. Now he served his notice. His clerk brought it, a folded paper sealed in red wax, and Esther read it standing up in the cold of the warehouse, with the smell of new wool all round her. The terms were plain, and they were cruel in their plainness. She might go on as she was, but the ground rent on all 3 warehouses would be trebled from the autumn. Or she might buy the freehold outright, buy the very ground from under her own business, and be free of him forever for the sum of £8,000, payable in full by Michaelmas, the old quarter day, the 29th of September, and if she did neither, she was to quit, turn her 60 hands into the street and her stock into the road, and go. £8,000 by Michaelmas. It was a great deal of money, even for her, even for the richest draper in the county. Her wealth was in cloth and in wages and in goodwill, not in gold sitting idle in a chest. To find 8,000 clear by the autumn, she would have to strain every sinew she had. She read it twice. Then she folded it very carefully and put it in her pocket, and her face gave nothing away, because her face never did. But there was more to Aldous Pennington's game than a notice served, and Esther knew that too. For not a fortnight later, the man himself came calling. Not with lawyers this time, with flowers. He was a big, well-fed, handsome man of 50, dressed rich, smiling easy. He sat across her office table, and he talked of the trade, and of the times, and of how 2 great houses of business, his and hers, might do well to think of one another. He did not say the word marriage. He was far too clever for that this early. He said the word merger, and he let her see how the 2 words rhymed. A woman alone carries a heavy load, Miss Marsh, he said, warm as milk. There's no shame in setting part of it down. I've carried it this far, she said. I find it fits my shoulder. He smiled at that, and finished his tea, and left the flowers on her table. And when he had gone, she gave the flowers to the girl who swept the office, because they were fine flowers and it would have been a waste, and because she wanted them out of her sight. So there it stood. Pennington held the ground she stood on, and he squeezed it with one hand and offered his other hand to save her. Treble the rent, or £8,000, or take him and be safe. It was the £30 all over again, dressed in a better coat. Buy the woman, or break her. She saw it perfectly. And she resolved, quiet and cold, that she would not be broken, and she would not be bought, not by him, not by anyone, not ever again. And into the middle of all this, at last, came the meeting the whole county had been waiting for. It happened at the Peace Hall. You must picture the Peace Hall to understand what came after. It was the great cloth market of the district, a huge square courtyard ringed round on every side with stone galleries, tier on tier, and in each little room a merchant showed his cloth. On a market morning it filled with hundreds of them, buyers and sellers and clerks and carters, the whole trade of the West Riding packed into one echoing square under the open sky. When a man cleared his throat there, the stone carried it. When a man raised his voice, everyone heard. Esther kept rooms on the ground gallery, the best position in the whole hall, which she had earned inch by inch across 10 years. She was there that morning with her cloth laid out, her greys and her blacks and her fine broadcloth, doing business as she did every market day. Julian came in from the North Gate. He had come on estate matters, for even a drowning duke must sell his tenant's cloth, and Wickham's tenants wove a great deal of it. He had Grace with him. He had not liked to leave her at the hall among strangers, and so the child came, small and quiet at his side, holding a fold of his coat. He did not know Esther kept rooms there, or perhaps some part of him did know, and had come anyway. A man can lie to himself as well as to the county. He turned a corner of the gallery, and there she was. 12 years. And there she was. She looked up from the cloth. And whatever it cost her, and it cost her a great deal, not one line of her face changed. She had schooled that face across a decade of hard bargaining, and it did not fail her now. She simply looked at him the way she would look at any customer, and waited. "Miss Marsh," he said. His voice was not quite steady, and he knew it, and he hated that she would have heard it. "You keep a fine room." "Your Grace," she said. 2 words, nothing in them, and the space between the two of them was so cold and so full at once that a clerk nearby stopped writing without knowing why. He wanted to say 100 things. He wanted to say her name, her Christian name, the way he had said it once at a gate in the mud. He said none of it. He looked at the cloth on her counter, and he made himself talk of grades and prices, and she answered him fair and level, quoting him a price no better and no worse than she would quote a stranger. It was a business conversation. It was the most dignified, most glacial, most heartbreaking business conversation ever held over 3 ells of grey broadcloth. And while they talked, the child did a small thing. Grace had drifted a half-step forward. She was looking up at Esther, in that grave, silent way she had, studying her the way children study a face they cannot yet name. And Esther, without breaking off a word she was saying about the wool clip, without seeming to notice at all, reached under her counter and brought out a little end of ribbon, a scrap of scarlet twill she used for tying samples, and she held it out to the girl. Grace took it. She held it in both hands like it was something precious, and she almost smiled. It was nothing. It was a scrap of ribbon. But Julian saw it, and something moved in his chest that he had thought long dead, and he had to look down at the cloth for a moment and let it pass. That is when he saw the handkerchief. Only a corner of it. Julian had reached into his breast pocket for his card case, and the fold of indigo cloth had come half out with it. And there in the market light the crooked blue monogram showed for half a heartbeat before he tucked it away. Esther saw it too. She saw the colour. She saw the crooked letters going uphill. She knew that dye. She knew those stitches. She had made those stitches at 17 in a weaver's cottage by candlelight, biting her lip because she could not get the corner square. She had given it to a boy at a gate, and then that boy had let his father buy her off for £30 and go to London and never write. 12 years, and he still carried it. For one instant her face did break, just for one instant. Then she shut it again like a shop shutter coming down, and she named him his price, and the meeting was over. That was the calm before the storm, because the county had been building toward one great public reckoning, and market day at the Peace Hall was where it came. The Dowager Duchess arrived at Wickham on a Thursday, and by Saturday she was at the Hall market, and her disdain was intact and undimmed by 12 years. Honoria, Dowager Duchess of Wickham, was a woman built entirely of rules. She wore them like whalebone. To her, rank was not vanity but duty, the frame that held the whole world up, and any softening of it was a crack in the wall of the world. She had told a weaver's daughter 12 years ago that she did not marry into Wickham, and she had meant it as a kindness, in her fashion. She had meant to save the girl from a place she would never fit, and to save Wickham from a stain. What Esther did not know, what no living soul in Holden Bridge knew, was the fuller truth of what this woman had done 12 years ago. But we will come to that. Keep it in the back of your mind. Honoria, Dowager Duchess, and the summer, the letters stopped. Keep it there. She came into the Peace Hall on the Saturday like a black ship under sail. Her son was there, and the child, and half the merchants of the riding, and there at her good ground floor room was Esther Marsh, doing business. The Dowager stopped. She looked at Esther the way you'd look at a stain on a good cloth, and in a voice pitched, quite deliberately, to carry across the stone gallery, she spoke. "So this is where the money's got to," she said. "Trade does climb, does it not? But climbing is not arriving." She let her eye travel over Esther's fine goods, her clerks, her 10 years of labour. "A draper's girl," she said, "keeps a very tidy shop." It was the old cut, sharpened, and it landed in a silence. because the whole gallery had gone quiet to listen, the way a market does when blood is in the water. Esther set down the cloth she was holding. She stood very straight. She did not colour, and she did not tremble. "I do keep a tidy shop, Your Grace," she said, clear and level, and the stone carried her voice as well as it had carried the dowager's. "Every yard in it is paid for. There's not many in this county can say the same. It was a hit. A clean one. For everyone in that gallery knew whose son stood there and whose great house was mortgaged to the London banks, and everyone knew exactly whose yards were not paid for." A little sound went round the galleries, not quite a laugh, quickly stifled, and the dowager's face went white and then red. But before she could answer, another voice cut in. And this one was worse. Aldous Pennington had been standing by, watching, biding. He was too shrewd to attack a woman with words in a public place. He had a better weapon, and he had brought it. He stepped forward now into the same ringing silence, and he had a paper in his hand. "Since we are all being frank this morning," he said, easy and loud, "perhaps this is the moment for it. Miss Marsh will forgive me. Business is business, and it's best done in the open." And he read the eviction notice aloud. He read it to the whole assembled market. The trebled rent, the £8,000, Michaelmas quarter day, or quit. He read every word of it into that stone square, so that every merchant and buyer and carter and clerk in the West Riding heard, in one morning, that the richest draper in the county stood to lose the ground beneath her feet by the autumn. It was masterful in its way. It was cruel, and it was masterful. In the space of 5 minutes, Esther Marsh had been named a jumped-up shopgirl by a duchess and shown to be standing on borrowed earth by a speculator. Humiliation and threat delivered in one set piece. Before the whole trade she had spent her life building. Even the men who liked her, and most of them did, looked at their boots. Esther stood in the middle of it. And here is the thing you must know about her, the thing the dowager did not know and Pennington had not reckoned on. She had been bought and sold at a gate at 17, and she had not wept then, and she did not weep now. Something in her, some cold, clean flame, only burned steadier the harder the wind blew. She let the silence hold a moment, long enough that they all began to feel it. Then she picked up her cloth again, the grey broadcloth, and she went on measuring it, calm as Sunday. "Michaelmas," she said, not loud, but every soul heard it. "The 29th of September. I'll remember the date." She snapped the cloth straight. "Now, is anyone here for buying, or only for watching?" And she turned back to her trade. It was the bravest thing most of them had ever seen, and they knew it, and the market slowly, awkwardly, began to move again around her. But one person had not looked at his boots. Julian Hale had watched the whole of it, and he had watched the woman he had lost 12 years ago stand alone in the middle of a public flaying and refuse to fall, and something in him that had been asleep since London woke all the way up and got to its feet. He said nothing then. It was not the moment, and he had no right, and he knew both. But that night, up at the warped and drowning hall, he did not sleep. He sat by the small parlour fire with the indigo handkerchief in his hand, turning it over, running his thumb across the crooked stitches, and he thought about a girl at a gate, and £30, and a letter he had written that had gone unanswered, and another all that long ago summer, and never a word back, until at last he had believed she had simply let him go. He had built 12 years of his life on that belief. He did not know it was a lie, not yet. Now Esther went home from that market, and she did not sleep either, but not for the same reason. She sat in her office above the warehouse, with one candle burning, and she was not thinking of the Duke, or she told herself she was not. She was thinking of £8,000. She was doing the sum, the hard cold sum, the way she did every hard thing, with a pencil and a sheet of paper and no self-pity at all. She could raise it. It would hurt. It would mean calling in what she was owed, and going careful for a year, and taking no new venture. But she could raise £8,000 by Michaelmas, and buy that ground from under Aldous Pennington, and be free of him forever. And she made up her mind, that night, alone, that she would do exactly that. She would not run, and she would not sell, and she would not marry her way out. She would fight for the earth beneath her warehouses, and she would win it clean. She would need help, mind, not a rescuer, help. There is a world of difference, and Esther knew it better than anyone alive. She would rally the Weavers' Guild. She would call in the goodwill she had built stitch by stitch across 10 years. The winter she had carried them through, she had never once meant it as a debt, but the town remembered, and a town that remembers is a kind of wealth no ledger holds. She would go to them not with her hand out, but with a plan, and together they would keep Holdenbridge's cloth trade in Holdenbridge's hands. And there was one more thing that fight would mean, though she did not want to look at it straight. Wickham's tenants wove a great part of the cloth her firm bought. If she was to build up her stock and her trade to raise this money, she would have to deal with Wickham, which meant dealing with the Duke, which meant sharing a table and sharing ledgers and sitting close over columns of figures with the one man in England she had trained herself never to think of. She looked at that fact for a long time. Then she wrote it into her plan in her small, neat hand, because it was necessary, and Esther Marsh did what was necessary. So the ledgers began to be shared, and where two people who have loved and lost each other are forced to sit close over honest work, week by week, small things begin. They were very small at first. You would have missed them. One morning Esther came down to open her warehouse and found the great shutter on the loading bay, the warped one that had hung crooked for a year and that she kept meaning to have seen to, hanging true. Someone had come in the dark before dawn and rehung it, planed the swollen edge, set it square on its hinges. No note. No name. The night watchman had seen nothing but a tall man in a plain coat gone before the light. She stood and looked at that shutter for a while. Then she went in and said nothing to anyone. Up at the hall, meanwhile, a small box of tea appeared. It came to Mrs. Bramwell by the carrier, no card, and it was a particular tea, one the old woman happened to have mentioned once at market, a black tea with candied orange peel in it, a small luxury she had not been able to afford in years. Julian never learned who sent it. He would not have guessed. But it was Esther, because Esther heard everything, and because a kindness done in the dark, to an old woman who had once been the only soul at Wickham to speak gentle to a weaver's girl at the gate, was a thing she could do without owing anyone anything or letting anyone in. That was how she permitted herself to feel, sideways, at a distance, through a box of tea to a housekeeper. And Grace. Grace took the croup that first damp month at the hall, coughing in the night in that great cold house, and there appeared on the doorstep one raw morning a length of soft red flannel, warm as anything, the very best for a child's chest, wrapped in paper with no name on it. Mrs. Bramwell cut it and stitched it into a little chest wrap, and the child wore it, and the croup eased, and nobody ever knew where the flannel came from, though if you have followed me this far you know very well. These were the first degrees of a slow thaw, if anyone had been keeping count. A shutter, a tea, a length of flannel, given in the dark, taken in the dark, never spoken of in the light. That was as far as Esther Marsh could go, and it was further than she had gone toward any living soul in 12 years, though she would have died before she called it what it was. And through those same weeks, she and Julian sat over the ledgers. Real work, tenants' clips and cloth grades and carriage costs, the honest necessary figures of the trade. They were correct with each other. Painfully correct, but now and again, bent over the same page, their hands would come near on the paper, and one of them would move away, and the candle would gutter, and neither would say a word. It was in the middle of all this, one night alone, that Esther finally did the thing she never did. She had come up to her office late, tired, her mind full of the £8,000 and the Guild and Michaelmas coming on. And she found herself, without deciding to, standing at her writing desk with her hand at her collar, and she drew up the ribbon. And there on the end of it was the small brass key. She looked at the top drawer for a long time. Then she opened it and moved aside the leases and lifted out the little japanned box with the worn gold scene on the lid. She set it on the desk in the candlelight. She had not opened it in, she could not rightly say how long. Years she had told everyone, told herself, that she never had cause to. She fitted the key. She turned it. She raised the lid. Inside, on a bed of faded cloth, lay 30 gold sovereigns. 30, every one of them. The very 30 her father had been paid at the gate to send her away. She had taken them from him that same night, quiet, and told him she would keep the shame so he need not, and she had never spent a single coin of it. Not in the lean years. Not the winter the trade failed. Not ever. She had built a fortune with her own 2 hands, and she had let this £30 sit locked in the dark for 12 years, untouched, because it was not money to her. It was a vow. It was the whole hard truth of her life, cast in gold. This is what I was worth to them. This is what I will never be again. She had kept it the way another woman keeps a wedding ring or a lock of a dead child's hair. A thing you do not spend, because spending it would be a kind of forgetting. She sat down slowly in the candlelight with the open box before her and the 30 coins gleaming dull in it, and for the first time in a very long time, Esther Marsh let herself remember the whole of it. The gate. The mud, her father's shaking hand, the boy's face at the coach window, and then no letters, and then nothing at all, forever. And the strange thing, the thing that frightened her, was that the old clean anger did not come the way it always came. Something else came with it now. Something to do with a shutter hung true in the dark, and a length of red flannel on a doorstep, and a corner of indigo cloth with crooked stitches carried 12 years next to a man's heart. She closed the box. She locked it. She put it away and dropped the key back under her collar. But she sat there a long while after, in the guttering light, not doing the sum any more, just sitting, and she could not have told you whether the ache in her was the old wound or something new, something she had no name for and no wish to name. Downstairs the town slept. Michaelmas was coming. The £8,000 still had to be found, and Pennington still held the ground, and the Dowager still watched with her cold, proud eye, and somewhere in a house at Wickham there was a truth 12 years buried that not one of them yet knew. But that is another part of the story, because there was a meeting coming, a great public meeting to raise the Michaelmas subscription where the whole county would gather. And Esther Marsh had made a decision she had told no one, a decision that would turn the whole class script of the riding on its head in front of everyone. What she was about to do, no draper's daughter had ever done to a duke, and she was about to do it in front of them all. The morning of the subscription meeting came grey and cold, with a wind off the moor that smelled of rain. They held it in the long upper room of the Peace Hall, where the wool had been weighed for 100 years. By 9 the benches were full. By past, men stood at the back with their hats in their hands. Esther came in plain. No jewels, a dark wool gown she might have worn to chapel. She took her place near the front and folded her gloved hands in her lap and waited, and all around her the room hummed the way a room hums when it is waiting to see one person humbled. They thought she had come to beg. They thought the 8,000 had broken her. Aldous Pennington sat across the aisle in a coat that cost more than a weaver earned in a year. He watched her the way a cat watches a bird it has already caught. Once he caught her eye and inclined his head, slow and sure, as if to say, "In your own good time." Near the door, late, came the Duke of Wickham. He had Grace by the hand. The child looked at the floor. Julian looked at no one and took a seat at the very back, among the tenants, among his own tenants, which was not where a duke sat. The dowager was not with him. That was noticed too. The chairman rose. He spoke of the Michaelmas subscription, of the infirmary, of the hard winter behind and the harder quarter ahead. He spoke of the freehold and the rent. He did not name Pennington, but he did not have to. Every soul in that room knew whose hand was at Esther Marsh's throat. And then he said, "Miss Marsh has asked to speak." She stood. The hum died all at once. You could hear the wind against the high windows. You could hear a bench creak somewhere at the back. "You all know my business," Esther said. Her voice was not loud. It carried anyway, the way a true thing carries. "You know the terms laid against it. £8,000 by the 29th of September, or the ground goes out from under 3 warehouses and 60 pairs of hands. That is no secret. It was read aloud to you all not a fortnight past, in this very hall." She let that sit. Nobody moved. "I did not come here to be pitied," she said. "I have never in my life asked this county to carry me, and I will not begin now. I came to make an offer, and I will make it out loud, before you all, so there can be no whisper afterward about what was meant." She turned. Not to the chairman, not to the merchants. She turned to the back of the room, to the man sitting among his tenants, with his daughter's small hand in his. "Your Grace," she said. Julian looked up. You could see the surprise go through him. "Your tenants weave good cloth," Esther said. "The best worsted in the riding comes off the looms on Wickham land, and it always has. This last winter it went half to waste, because there was no one to take the whole clip and no coin to pay fare for it. Your father let those looms sit idle." "I will not." She drew a breath. The whole room drew it with her. "I will take the entire cloth clip from every loom on Wickham land," she said. "At a fair price, set fair, paid on time. I will lift the rents your steward set too high, so a weaver can eat in a slack month and not lose his cottage, and I will do it under one contract, my name and yours upon it, as partners in the trade. Marsh cloth off Wickham looms, sold across the riding under both our names." Someone gasped, an actual gasp, quick and sharp. Because it was upside down. It was the world turned over. A draper's daughter, standing in the Peace Hall, offering terms to a duke, not asking, not curtsying, not selling herself into his empty house to save her skin. Offering, as an equal, as the one with the goods and the coin and the 60 hands holding them out to the ruined man at the back. Pennington's smile had gone. He half rose from his seat. Esther did not look at him. She crossed the floor. The whole room turned to follow her, benches groaning, necks craning. She walked the length of that long weighing room, past the merchants and the clerks and the wives, and she stopped in front of the Duke of Wickham, and she put out her hand. Bare, she had drawn the glove off. Her hand, that had counted coin and hung cloth and known work, held out plain to him. "Well, Your Grace," she said, "will you shake on it, or won't you?" For a long moment he only looked at her. Grace looked up at him too. And then Julian Hale stood, and he took the hand of the richest draper in the West Riding in front of the whole assembled county, and he shook it once, firm, the way men do who mean a bargain. "I will," he said. His voice was rough. And gladly. The room did not know whether to cheer or to be scandalized, so it did both, in a great confused roar, and under cover of it Esther let go his hand and stepped back and put her glove on again, and only she knew that her fingers were shaking. Pennington sat down. He said nothing. But his eyes, when they found her, had changed. There was no cat in them now. There was only a cold man who had just watched his prey grow teeth. That was the 50th part of it. That was the turn. And everything after came from the shaking of two hands in a cold stone room. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Esther's life. There was a contract now, and a contract meant ledgers, and ledgers meant the two of them bent over the same page by candlelight in her office above the warehouse, adding the same columns. Julian knew nothing of trade. He had been raised to spend, not to earn, and he made it worse than useless at first, and he knew it, and he did not pretend otherwise. That she liked. A proud man would have blustered. He only said, "Show me again," and bent closer and learned. He learned fast. That she liked too, and did not want to. They worked late. Grace came with him more often than not, because the hall was cold and the child would not be parted from him, and Esther gave her paper and a stub of pencil, and after a while gave her scraps of cloth and a blunt needle, and the girl sat in the corner and stitched, saying nothing, always nothing, but watching everything with her mother-hungry eyes. One night the rain came hard, and the fire burned low, and they were both tired, and Julian reached across the ledger to point at a figure at the very moment Esther reached to turn the page, and their hands met on the paper and stayed there a breath too long. Neither of them moved. The candle guttered. Outside the rain came down. Then Esther drew her hand back and said, "You've carried the ones wrong in this column," in a voice that was not quite steady, and Julian said, "So I have," and looked at her a moment longer than the ledger needed, and they went back to the work. But something had passed over the page that neither of them named, and both of them felt. It was Grace who broke it open. Grace, who never spoke. She had been at the hall, in her father's study, hunting a fresh pencil in his desk, and she had found, in the shallow top drawer, under the seals and the sealing wax, a folded square of indigo cloth. She did not know what it was. She only knew it was soft and old, and had a letter worked into the corner in crooked stitches, and she liked it, and the next time she came to the office she brought it, folded small in her pinafore pocket, and she crossed the room without a word and put it in Esther's lap, and looked up, waiting to be told what it was. Esther unfolded it. She knew it the instant her fingers touched it. She had made those stitches. She had been 17. She had sat by a window with a needle and worked a J and an H into the corner of a good bit of indigo, crooked because her hands were shaking then too, and she had pressed it into a boy's hand at a gate, in the mud, the day his father's money went into her father's fist. 12 years. He had carried it 12 years. "Where did you get this?" Esther said. Her voice had gone very quiet. Grace pointed. Toward the door. Toward the hall, toward her father's desk. Then the child, seeing something in Esther's face she had not meant to put there, shrank back, and Esther made herself gentle at once, and said, "No, no, sweetheart, you've done nothing wrong. Thank you for showing me." But her hands were closed hard on the cloth. He kept it. In his desk. Next to his heart at the market, and in his desk at home, 12 years, all these years. A man does not keep a thing like that for a woman he threw over. A man does not carry a girl's crooked stitches across half his life if he simply chose to let her go. And that was the thing that frightened her, worse than Pennington, worse than Michaelmas, because if he kept it, then the story she had told herself for 12 years, the clean, simple story where he took his father's part and forgot her and married where he was told, that story had a hole in it. And if that story had a hole in it, then she did not know what to do with the anger that had kept her upright all these years. And a woman who does not know what holds her upright is a woman about to fall. So she did what frightened people do. She recoiled. She folded the handkerchief small and gave it back to Grace and said, "Take it home. Put it where you found it. It isn't ours to keep." And she was short with Julian that night over the ledgers, short and cold, and would not meet his eye, and he did not know why. And went home hurt and puzzled into the rain. Because it was easier to be angry than to hope. She had learned that at 17. Hope had cost her everything once. Anger had built 3 warehouses. She knew which one she could trust. And Pennington, all this while, was not idle. He was too clever to strike at her directly again. Instead, he went at the edges. He put word about that the Duke was courting the Draper's fortune and nothing else, that a ruined lord would say anything, sign anything, to get his hands on Marsh coin, and any woman fool enough to believe otherwise deserved the fleecing she'd get. It was a good lie. It was a lie half the county already half believed, and Pennington only had to feed it. Then he went at her trade. He undercut her on the army contract, the morning crepe order for the garrison, dropping his price below cost to steal it, and he could afford to bleed where she could not. And he poached her foreman, her best man, 20 years with the firm, with an offer of wages she couldn't match without ruin. The man came to her ashamed, cap in hand, and she let him go kind, because you cannot ask a man to starve for loyalty, but it hurt like a tooth pulled. The £8,000 felt further off every week. Michaelmas came on like a tide. And then, 12 days before quarter day, old Mrs. Bramwell came to the warehouse. She came at dusk, in her Sunday black. The housekeeper who had served at Wickham Hall longer than Julian had been alive. She would not sit. She stood in the middle of Esther's office with a flat cloth bundle held against her chest with both arms, the way you hold something you have carried a long way and are afraid to set down. "I've done a wicked thing, Miss Marsh," she said. "I've done it these 12 years by holding my tongue, and I find I cannot carry it to my grave." She set the bundle on the table. It was letters. A thick packet of them, tied with a faded ribbon, the paper yellowed at the edges, the ink brown with age. Dozens of them. "He wrote to you," Mrs. Bramwell said. "That whole summer he was in London, and the autumn after, and the winter, he wrote you near every week. I saw him give them to the post myself, with my own eyes, sealed and directed to your father's house plain as day." Esther could not speak. "They never left the hall," the old woman said. "Her Grace had them brought to her. Every one. The boy's letters and yours both, for you wrote back, at the first before you gave it up. She had them taken out of the post-bag and brought to her sitting-room, and she read them, and she kept them, and she let that boy believe you never answered, and she let you believe he never wrote. 12 years, miss, 12 years she's let it stand." The room seemed to tilt. Esther put her hand flat on the table. "Why?" she said. It came out a whisper. "Why keep them? Why not burn them?" "I've asked myself that," Mrs. Bramwell said. "I think, God forgive her, I think she could not bring herself to. I think even she knew what she'd done. And now the old Duke's dead, and she's a widow in a mortgaged house, and I stole the key to her cabinet while she slept, and I brought them to you, because you've a right to your own life, Miss Marsh, and it was stolen from you, same as it was stolen from him." Esther untied the ribbon with fingers that would not obey her. She opened the first letter. His hand, young, the ink pressed hard. "My dear Esther," and words she had waited 12 years to read and had told herself would never come, that had come, that had been written and sealed and posted and stolen out of the dark before they could ever reach her. He had not thrown her over. He had never stopped. She had built a fortress against a betrayal that never happened. She was still standing there with the letter in her hand when the office door opened without a knock, and Aldous Pennington walked in. He was not alone. Behind him came a spare, dark man in a black coat with a leather case under his arm. A stranger, a city man, out of place in Holden Bridge as a crow in a milk jug. "Forgive the intrusion," Pennington said, and did not mean it. His eye fell on the letters, on the old woman, on Esther's white face, and something in him gathered and grew pleased. "I see I come at a tender moment. I'll be brief then. This gentleman is Mr. Rooke. He is the agent of the London bank that holds the mortgage upon Wickham Hall. I asked him north to settle a small matter of fact, since the county seems confused about it. He took the case from the man's hands and drew out a folded paper and laid it on the table beside the letters, gentle, deliberate, so the two lay side by side. The terms, Pennington said. In full, £40,000 secured on every acre and stone of Wickham. Interest 3 years unpaid. The bank will foreclose at McElmus unless a very great sum is found at once, a sum no duke as beggared as this one could raise in a lifetime of rents. He smiled. Unless, of course, he were to marry it, unless there were, close at hand, a foolish woman rich enough to buy his name and be flattered into thinking he wanted anything else of her. He looked at the letters. He looked at Esther. Old love letters, is it? He said softly. How very convenient that they should turn up now. A ruined man will spin any pretty tale to a lonely woman with £8,000 she cannot find and a fortune he sorely needs. 12 years he pined, did he, and came home the very season his creditors closed in? Do the sum, Miss Marsh. You of all people know how to do a sum. The letters. The mortgage. Laid side by side on her own table, and the whole ugly shape of it rose up in front of her, exactly as he meant it to. Because it was true, the part that was true. Wickham could not survive McElmus without a fortune. Her fortune. And now, at just this hour, letters, proof of love, arriving exactly when love would be most useful. She did not know that Pennington had not planned the letters, that Mrs. Bramwell's coming was no scheme of his, only a chance he'd walked into and turned to his hand. She only knew how it looked. She knew how it would look to every soul in the county by morning. And she knew, with a cold that went to her bones, that she could no longer tell the true thing from the trap, because both things were true at once. He had loved her, and he needed her money, both at the same time, and there was no way on God's earth to prove to a watching county which one had brought him home. Esther set the letter down. She stood very straight. "Get out of my office," she said. Pennington spread his hands. "I only bring you the truth, my dear. Someone must. Consider my offer still open. A merger of 2 houses, honest and plain, no pretence of hearts. You'll not be cheated by me. I want your trade, and I say so. That is more than your duke will ever give you." He inclined his head. "I'll not press you tonight. But quarter day comes for us all." He took up the mortgage paper and left it, deliberate, on her table, and went out with his city crow behind him, and the door closed, and Esther stood alone with the old woman, and the letters, and the terms, and the wreck of 12 years lying open in front of her. Mrs. Bramwell was weeping. "Miss Marsh, miss, I never meant—" "You meant well," Esther said. Her voice had gone somewhere far away and level. "You did a brave thing. Go home now. Say nothing to anyone. Go on." When the old woman had gone, Esther sat down at her own table and looked at the 2 papers a long time. The letters that said he loved her, the mortgage that said he needed her. And she understood, sitting there, that Pennington had done a worse thing than an eviction. He had poisoned the well. He had made it so that even if Julian Hale loved her with his whole heart, she could never take it, because taking it would look to all the world exactly like being bought. And she had sworn, hadn't she? She had sworn at 17 with 30 coins in her fist that she would never be bought again. The word went round the county within the day, as she knew it would. Pennington saw to that the Duke's old love letters had surfaced most conveniently, that the ruined lord had a warehouse of coin near enough to marry, that the draper's girl who'd risen so high was about to be gulled by a title after all, poor foolish woman, just as her betters had always said she would be. Julian came to her the next evening. She would not see him at first. Then she did, because there are things that must be said to a person's face. He came in and saw the letters on the table where she had left them, deliberately, and she watched him understand what they were, watched 12 years go through him in a single moment. His face, she would remember his face. He picked one up, his own young hand. He said, I wrote these, in a voice that broke on it. I wrote these, you never. And then, understanding the rest, understanding his own mother, God in heaven, she took them. Yes, Esther said. You thought I never. He stopped. All these years you thought I threw you over. Yes. Esther. He came toward her. Esther. Then you know now. You know I never, I know, she said, and stopped him with her voice, cold and clear, because if she let him near she would break, and she could not afford to break. I know you wrote them, I know your mother stole them, I know none of it was your doing, and I am sorry for it, Julian, sorry to the bottom of my soul. His given name, the first time she had ever said it. It cost her, and she let it cost her. And it changes nothing. How can it change nothing? Because of the mortgage, she said. Because of the £40,000. Because tomorrow every man in this riding believes the ruined Duke came home to marry a warehouse, and if I take your hand now, letters or no letters, that is what I am. The woman who was bought, and I have been bought once already in my life, Your Grace, for £30, at your family's gate, in the mud. £30 your father counted into my father's hand to be rid of me. He went white. I did not know that, he said. I swear to you I did not know that. I believe you, she said. But it was done all the same, and I built everything I have out of the wreck of it, and I swore I would owe no living soul, and I would rather sell every warehouse I own to that snake Pennington and walk out of Holden Bridge with nothing than stand up in front of this county and be bought a second time, for £40,000 instead of 30. That's all. That is the whole of it. Now please go home to your daughter. Esther, go home, Julian, and he went. Because there was nothing else he could do, and because he was, whatever else, a man who had learned at last not to force a thing. He went out into the dark, and she watched him go from the window, and then she sat down and wrote a letter of her own to Aldous Pennington, saying she would hear his offer for the freehold and the warehouses and the whole of Marsh & Co. after Michaelmas. She would sell. She would take the money clean and owe nobody. She would be free of every one of them, the Duke and the Dowager and the speculator alike, and if freedom was a cold house to live in, well, she had lived cold before. That was the all is lost of it. That was the bottom. Michaelmas quarter day came bright and hard, a real autumn morning, the 29th of September, with a frost that burned off by 9 and a sky-washed blue. They gathered at the Peace Hall for the reckoning. The whole county again, the merchants, the weavers, the tenants, the gentry. Pennington was there in his fine coat, with Mr. Rook the bank's agent at his elbow, ready to see the Duke foreclosed and the Draper delivered into his hands, both prizes in one morning. Esther came to sell. She had the deeds in a case. She meant to sign, take his coin, and be done. The Dowager came too. That surprised them. Honoria, Dowager Duchess of Wickham, in grey silk, upright as a fence-post, come to watch her son's ruin with her cold, proud eye. She had not reckoned on what her son would do. Because Julian Hale rose before Pennington could open his mouth, before the reckoning could begin, and asked the chairman leave to speak, and got it, and stood up in the middle of the Peace Hall in front of the whole county, and said what no one there had ever heard a duke say. There is a story going about, he said, that I came home to Holden Bridge to marry Miss Marsh's fortune. I want to answer it. Here, in front of you all, where the story was told. The room went still as stone. It is true that I am ruined, Julian said. £40,000 my father borrowed, and I inherited the debt with the title. It is true the bank forecloses today. Mr. Rook stands yonder to see it done. That is all true, and I'll not hide from it. Pennington was smiling. He thought this was surrender. And it is true, Julian went on, that Esther Marsh is the richest draper in this county, and that her fortune, laid against my debt, would clear it in a morning. So a man might well come courting such a woman for such a reason. I understand why you believed it. I would have believed it myself." He turned. He looked at Esther, sitting straight and pale with her deed case in her lap. "So I have done this," Julian said. "This morning, before I came here, I sold the last acres of Wickham that are mine free and clear to sell, the home farm, the water meadows, the wood, everything not entailed. Sold them outright to Mr. Rook's bank for what they would fetch. It is not the whole 40,000, it is £11,000. But it is every penny I have in this world that is mine to give, and it goes against the debt today, from my own hand, not from hers." A murmur went through the room like wind through barley. "I have made myself poorer this morning than I was last night," Julian said, "so that no man alive can say I need her money, because after today I have given away the last of my own, and if I still come to her, it can only be for herself. That is the only way I could think of to answer the lie. A man cannot be marrying a fortune when he has just thrown his own into the sea." Then he did a thing stranger still. He came down off the bench and crossed the floor to the counting table where Esther sat, the same long walk she had made to him 3 months before, the whole room turning to watch, and he took from his breast pocket a square of indigo cloth and laid it on the table in front of her. It was the handkerchief, her handkerchief. But the hem had been redone. Clumsily, in big, crooked, careful stitches, a man's stitches, a man who had never held a needle before and had sat up nights teaching himself, pricking his fingers, to mend the thing she made at 17. "You hemmed this for me 12 years ago," Julian said, low, but the room was so silent it carried. "I have carried it every day since. When I thought you'd forgotten me, it was all I had. I've mended it now, badly. As you can see, I've no skill at it. But I thought if I brought it back to you, mended by my own hand, you might see that I mean to spend the rest of my life learning to do properly the things that matter to you." He swallowed. "Teach me, Esther. That's all I ask. Not your fortune. Not your hand even, not yet. Only, teach me to be worth it. I'll start at the bottom, like any apprentice. I'll learn the trade. I'll earn my place beside you, or I'll have none. I swear it before them all. You could have heard a pin drop on the wool scales." And Esther Marsh looked down at the crooked stitches, the man's clumsy crooked stitches, laid over her girl's clumsy crooked stitches, 12 years apart, both of them shaking when they sewed, and something in her that had been locked since she was 17 came quietly and finally open. But before she could speak, Aldous Pennington began to laugh. "Very pretty," he said, standing, spreading his hands to the room. "Very touching. A handkerchief. Well, sentiment is cheap, Your Grace, and £11,000 does not clear 40. You are still ruined. Miss Marsh is still 8,000 short of her freehold, and I still hold the ground beneath her warehouses. So when the theatricals are done—" "Do you?" Esther said. She had risen. She had a paper of her own in her hand now, and she was not pale any more. "Do you hold it, Mr. Pennington? The ground lease? Because I've had lawyers on that lease this fortnight past, good ones, out of Leeds, paid for out of the very fortune you've been so worried I'd give away. And they tell me a curious thing." She turned to the room. "They tell me the lease Mr. Pennington claims, the one he read out to you all in this hall, so grandly, threatening my 60 hands, was assigned to him 3 years ago by a mortgage he had already pledged twice over to 2 different banks. He borrowed against the same ground twice. Gentlemen, it's fraud. The lease is void, and worse than void. And the notes he raised on it fall due." She looked at Rook. "Why, they fall due today. Michaelmas. Do they not, miss her? Rook?" The bank's agent had gone very pale. He looked at the paper Esther held out, and he looked at Pennington, and he said, in the flat voice of a man who has just watched his security turn to smoke, "They do." "Then call them in," Esther said. The room erupted, and out of the noise came the weavers, Her weavers, the men and women she had carried through the slack winter, the ones whose looms she had kept turning when Pennington would have let them starve. One after another they stood. They told what they knew, how Pennington had come to them offering to buy their cottages cheap when they were desperate, and Esther had lent them the rent instead and asked no interest. How his mill dumped dye in the beck that killed the fish for a mile, how he'd forged a tally here and shorted a weight there. Small folk standing up one after another in the Peace Hall, and the weight of all their small true testimonies came down on Aldous Pennington like a wall falling. His own bank called his notes. Right there. Rook, seeing which way it had gone, wanting no part of a fraud, demanded payment of the notes on the ground lease, and Pennington could not pay, because the ground lease was worthless, because he'd pledged it twice, and a man who has built his whole tower on the same borrowed stone twice over has nothing under him at all when it's pulled. His firm came down in a morning, in front of everyone. The speculator who believed every soul had a price discovered that a county he had squeezed for 20 years had altogether a price he could not pay. "Your offer, Mr. Pennington," Esther said, into the wreck of it. "For my warehouses. For my firm. For me. I've considered it." She smiled, and it was not a warm smile. The answer is no. He left the hall a ruined man, and no one moved to help him, and the crow from London went with him because there was nothing left to stay for. And the freehold, the £8,000 of ground beneath the warehouses, now no longer Pennington's to hold. The Weavers' Guild bought it, together out of a subscription raised that very morning in that very room, every man putting in what he could, because Esther Marsh had carried them through the winter, and now, altogether, they carried her. The community she had protected turned round and saved her. They bought the ground, and they held it in common with her, Guild and Draper together, so that no speculator could ever put a hand to her throat again. 60 pairs of hands. She had never been alone at all. There was a reckoning still to come, and it came quiet. At the hall, 2 days after, in the cold drawing-room. Julian sent for his mother, and Esther was there, and Grace, and old Mrs. Bramwell standing white by the door. Honoria did not deny it. Perhaps she was too proud to lie once the thing was laid bare. She sat very straight in her grey silk, and she said, "Yes, I took the letters, both his and hers. I read them, and I kept them, and I let each of you believe the other had gone silent." Her chin came up. A draper's girl does not marry into Wickham. I did my duty as I saw it. I would not have the name stained. The name, Julian said, was £40,000 in debt, and would have gone under this very Michaelmas but for the draper's girl you tried to keep out of it. She saved it. You near destroyed it. Which of you loved this house better, mother? The old woman had no answer to that. For the first time in her life, perhaps, Honoria of Wickham had no answer. "You'll not be cast out," Julian said. "I'll not do to you what was done to her. You have a home here as long as you live. But you will do one thing. You will stand, you will sit, in the front pew, in full view of this whole county, and you will watch me marry Esther Marsh in Holdenbridge Church. The wedding you forbade. You'll watch it from the best seat in the house." There was a silence, and the dowager, that hard, proud woman, looked at her son, and looked at the draper who had saved them, and looked last and longest at little Grace, who had crept to stand at Esther's side, with her hand in Esther's hand, as though it had always been there. And something in the old face gave way, just at the corner, just for a moment. "I find," Honoria said at last, dry as autumn leaves, "that the girl has better manners than I credited, and considerably better sense than my late husband." She folded her hands. "I will sit in your front pew, Julian. God help me, I believe I shall be glad to." It was not an apology. She was not a woman who could make one, but it was as near as she had come to anything true in 30 years, and they let it stand. Esther walked home at dusk. Julian walked with her as far as her own doorstep, and no further, because he had said he would court her slow, and he meant it, and stopped at the gate the way a man stops, who has learned at last that a thing worth having cannot be seized. "Well," he said, "the debt's not cleared. I'm a poor duke yet. I've a mortgaged house and a daughter and no skill at anything that earns." "You've learnt to hem," Esther said. "Badly, very badly." He almost smiled. "Esther, I'll not ask you again today. I only want to know, is there a road, any road at all, however long, that ends with you, because I'll walk it however far, only tell me it's there." She looked at him a long moment in the falling light, the boy at the coach window, the man who'd thrown his last acre in the sea rather than be thought to buy her. The crooked stitches. "There's a road," she said. He let out a breath he seemed to have held 12 years. "Then court me, Your Grace," Esther said. "Slowly, mind. I'll not be won in a season, and I'll not be won with money, and I'll not be told what a draper's girl may or mayn't do by any soul living. You'll earn it. Every inch." "Every inch," he said. "I swear it." Then good night, and she went in and shut her own door, on her own house, on her own terms. But she stood behind it a moment with her hand over her mouth, and she was laughing, or crying, she could not have told you which, and it did not matter, because for the first time in 12 years the ache under her collar where the little brass key hung was not a wound any more. It was just her heart, beating, going on. A year on there were 2 names over the warehouse door. Marsh and Wickham, painted fresh in gold, the draper's name first, because she'd earned it first, and he'd not have had it any other way. The tenants' looms ran full. The rents were fair. The debt was coming down, slow and honest, out of trade, out of good cloth honestly sold, not out of any woman's purse. The shutters at Wickham Hall hung true. He'd learned to set them himself. Grace spoke now. Not a great deal, she was a quiet child by nature, but freely, and warm, and one bright morning in the office, threading a needle beside Esther at the long table, working the crooked J and H into the corner of a new bit of indigo the way Esther had shown her, the girl looked up and said, "Without thinking about it at all, Mother, is this stitch right?" And Esther Marsh, who had built 3 warehouses out of £30 and a broken heart, had to put down her own needle a moment because she could not see the cloth. "Aye, love," she said, when she could. "That stitch is exactly right." On the office wall, framed, hung the indigo handkerchief, her girl's stitches and his man's stitches side by side in the one hem, where anyone might see it and no one need be told what it meant. And the japanned box stood open on the shelf at last, empty of its 30 gold sovereigns. She'd spent them, finally, after 12 years, spent them clean, on thread and cloth and slates for the charity school down Holden Bridge, so that some other weaver's girl might learn her letters and never have to be bought or sold by anyone. 30 pieces of silver turned, at the very last, into something that could not be taken away. They saw Pennington once more that autumn, small and grey, boarding the London coach with one trunk, gone to try his luck where nobody yet knew his name. Nobody waved, nobody jeered either. He simply went, the way winter goes. And the dowager sat in the front pew, as she'd promised, upright in her grey silk, and watched her son marry the draper's daughter, and if any soul had been watching her instead of the bride, they might have seen the old proud face soften just at the corner, at the sight of a small girl in a new frock, scattering petals down the aisle. They gave the dowager an honoured corner at the hall, and a grandchild who in time learned to love her. And she was quietly, dryly grateful for it to the end of her days, though she'd have died before she said so. Love that comes back is not the same as love that never left. It has to be re-earned, stitch by clumsy stitch, and it cannot simply be reclaimed like a coat left at the door. Esther knew that. She'd made him earn it. And he'd been glad to, every inch, because a thing earned that way is a thing no one can ever take from you again. 12 years on, the Duke found his first love, but he did not find her waiting. He found her risen, the richest draper in the county, standing on her own ground, owing no soul alive, and he had to become a man worth standing beside her before she'd have him. That's the whole of it. That's the story. If you believe, it's never too late for the heart. If you've ever thought a door that closed at 17 might, against all sense, open again, then tell me down below the town you're watching from tonight. I want to see just how far this old Yorkshire story travels.